السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. لعل وسائل الإعلام الغربية اليوم حبلى بالتكهنات حول إذا ما كنا نقف على أعتاب الحرب العالمية الثالثة أم لا. في الواقع نحن نرزح منذ زمن تحت مخالب هذه الحرب بحسب المراقبين. الحرب الطويلة لم تتوقف أبدا، إذ في أعقاب الأزمة المالية الأمريكية عام 2008 احتاجت الولايات المتحدة إلى تعزيز قاعدة الموارد الثانوية لاقتصادها. وبالنسبة إلى صقور المحافظين الجدد، كان وهن روسيا وضعفها بعد الحرب الباردة فرصة لفتح جبهة حرب جديدة. أراد الصقور الأمريكيون قتل عصفورين بحجر واحد: نهب موارد روسيا القيمة لتعزيز اقتصادهم، وتقسيم روسيا إلى أجزاء. بالنسبة إلى المحافظين الجدد أولئك لم تنتهي الحرب الباردة أبدا، يبقى العالم في منظورهم مصنفا ثنائيا: نحن وهم، الخير والشر. وفقا لمسؤول روسي رفيع المستوى، منذ عام 2014 على الأقل تحركت اللعبة الكبرى نحو محاولة الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية السيطرة على تدفقات الطاقة وممراتها وتحديد سعرها. وفي المقلب الآخر اتخذت روسيا إجراءات مضادة لإنشاء شبكات عبور سلسة وديناميكية عبر خطوط الأنابيب والممرات المائية الداخلية الآسيوية، ولتحديد سعر الطاقة اليوم عبر أوبك بلس. لذا عندما أجرى بوتين استفتاءات المناطق الأربع وقام بتعبئة القوات العسكرية الروسية وذكر العالم بأنه منفتح على المحادثات والحوار، هو قام برفع سقف التصريحات والأداء. ثم تم تفجير خطوط أنابيب نوردستيم، هذا الإرهاب الاقتصادي والبيئي والصناعي على حد سواء بحسب الخبراء، إذ من المعلوم أن الولايات المتحدة هي اقتصاد كبير غني بالموارد، لكن أوروبا ليست كذلك، بل تعتمد بشكل أكبر على واردات الغذاء والطاقة. التضخم المالي يغير كل الحسابات. ثم وقعت تفجيرات جسر القرم التي مثلت نقطة تحول في هذا الصراع. فمن المستفيد من هذه التفجيرات وتصعيد الوضع وتأزيمه أمنيا وسياسيا وعسكريا واقتصاديا؟ وماذا سيحدث وكيف تترجم مثل هذه التطورات الخطيرة في استشراف الأحداث الداهمة؟ لقراءة أعمق للمشهد في تلك المنطقة وتبعاته عالميا، يطيب لنا أن نستقبل من العاصمة الإيطالية روما مؤسس ومدير منتدى النزاعات السيد ألستر كروك، الدبلوماسي البريطاني السابق الذي عمل في الاستخبارات البريطانية وفي دبلوماسية الاتحاد الأوروبي. أهلا بكم إلى حلقة جديدة من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. Alistair Crook, founder and director of Conflicts Forum, former senior British diplomat, and a sharp mind in observing and reading world dynamics and politics. Welcome to الداخل from the inside, Alistair.
Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure to have you. A lot has happened since we last talked. In consequence to the developments between Russia and NATO-led Ukraine and the heated rhetoric and statements from both sides, we have witnessed recently the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines. This mammoth environmental catastrophe that was termed as an act of industrial terrorism. In your opinion, Alistair, and perspective, who benefits from this act? Who actually did it? What would be the implications of such an act of sabotage?
Well, I think we know fairly clearly that the Americans make very few bones about it. They say it was a great thing. It will be an opportunity for the future, and LNG from America has a new prospect. Yes, it was an American interest to do this, essentially because, as I understand it, there were some back channels going on from Germany to Moscow in the recent days, not so long ago. Schroeder, I think, was involved with it in order to try and solve the problem of Nord Stream and get it started again. Germans are really beginning to get frightened about what's coming this winter, really get quite frightened because in last month, September, was not particularly cold. It was just normal September. But in Germany, they used 15% more gas than usual instead of reducing their use of gas by 20%. And if the winter really turns out to be cold, then Germany expects to use 3 times, a factor of 3 times, what they would in, say, last winter, which was a mild winter. So they're getting very frightened about the situation. So I think there were channels, backward channels going to Moscow. And I think the Americans wouldn't accept that. They wouldn't accept the idea of Germany going back and taking gas from Moscow and possibly even falling back into the Russian sphere. So it's gone. It's out. And the consequences will be dire for Europe.
So the Americans, they will never, ever accept that. What about the peoples of the EU? How would they react to such an action?
Well, it's very strange because there is a great silence about from Europe and from its leadership. There's no change in it. Look, we hear every so often. Just yesterday, there was a French minister who was saying, well, you know, we really need to have some sort of, you know, stand down. We need to talk to Russia, etc. Borrell said something similar. But for Russia, it means nothing because they know that the EU have no agency whatsoever. They have no political power. And the people, it's completely repressed here. You can't speak out, you can't say things. The narrative is dominated by the platforms, by the mainstream media, which takes totally the narrative from Brussels, and it's all about saving Ukraine, saving democracy, saving the liberal order, and that's all.
Right. As you said, winter is coming and the ground will be freezing. Some might say the conflict is heading to a pause. However, what is curious for so many is, as you also referred to, the eerie silence emanating out of Europe in the wake of their vital energy pipelines lying broken on the Baltic Sea floor at a time of financial crisis. Hardly a word or a murmur is to be heard about this matter in the European press, and also, as you refer to, nothing from Germany, as if it never happened. Why, Alistair?
It's because the Ukraine is a symbol for many other projects. And one of those projects, of course, is to make the European Union more integrated, more of a disciplined empire under the control of Brussels, i.e. to take away the sovereignty from the member states and to invest it much more in the European Union. That's one aspect. But there is another trend which is in there, which is really a militant, radical green agenda. And for the green agenda, some of them at the most extreme, not all of them, but some of them in the leadership of the German Green Party and are very prominent in Germany, believe that we have to see the deindustrialization of Germany and the deindustrialization of Europe. So for them, maybe Nord Stream is not seen as such a disaster, cutting the sabotage of Nord Stream, but maybe as a path towards their objective of going to a totally green future where it will be less growth and less pollution. So yes, I don't think, you mentioned just now, are we going to see a pause because of what's happening? Well, I'm doing this talk with you just after the Russian response to the Kerch Bridge attack, where they've used perhaps some, we don't know the exact number, about 320 missiles. But I think the signals from this are very clear. It's no dialogue under these circumstances. When Ukraine is attacking the bridge, and as Putin has just announced, that they've been also attacking the nuclear power stations in Russia, in Kursk, 3 times, and bringing down the high voltage lines. And Putin is very clear, this is terrorism as far as he's concerned. And, so Russia is saying, no dialogue.
Yes, but
we'll wait for winter.
Alistair, how do you speculate the repost of the Russian side? Is it only that, well, there's no dialogue? Are things going to deteriorate into the abyss of what's going to take place in this part of the world?
No, I think that you have in President Putin a person, I've sat and listened to him personally talking about nuclear weapons, and he is acutely aware of the dangers of nuclear weapons. And it is illegal against the protocols of Russia itself to use tactical nuclear weapons or to use strategic nuclear weapons unless and only if Russia, the motherland, and its people face an existential threat from an enemy, but not just simply to pursue a war in Ukraine or anything like that. That would not be legal under the Russians. So I don't think we are, but I think what we are seeing is the next chapter in the long war, the long, long war that has never ended at the end of the Cold War and which is still going ahead. And that long war is the war of NATO moving closer and closer and taking more and more territory. So Ukraine is just a pawn in this wider game. The Europeans are not really in it at all. It's really between Washington and Moscow. And the Europeans may say they want to have some dialogue with Moscow, but I don't think America will allow them to have a dialogue with Russia, even if they want it. And look what happened when Schroeder tried to have a dialogue about Nord Stream opening. Bang! A few days later, 3 of the 4 streams, 3 of the 4 lines have been destroyed. So the message is pretty clear to Europe. You are under our tutelage and you're going to stay there and you have to put up with it. So what was Biden's response to all of this? And this is the most important thing. What did he say? He immediately rang up Zelensky. And he said to Zelensky, we are with you and we'll send more weapons, whatever it takes. And Zelensky said, air defensive. And Biden said, we'll look at all of that. So I think partly what we saw in this recent period and with these missiles being fired is the preparation for the next stage, as you rightly say, in November, when usually towards the end of October, beginning of November is the cold season. Now the ground is completely wet and soggy and muddy, not suitable for mechanized warfare at all.
Exactly.
But in November, and I think some of the missile attacks you saw taking place yesterday, that's when I told about it, were the beginning of the softening up process for what will be coming in November. And indeed today, even as we're speaking now, earlier this morning, there's, I think, been more in the Kherson province. Again, I think all of this is just the careful build up to it. Well, the Ukrainians say with all those missiles, by the way, only 10 people have been killed. So they clearly it was never against the population, the Ukrainian population. It was against strategic targets.
Specific targets. What Putin said in his 21st of September address was, quote, Russia is ready to use all possible means to defend its territorial integrity and people. Putin did not threaten Europe with nukes or nuclear weapons, and his words were in part a repost to the Liz Truss comment that she would not hesitate to use the UK nuclear capability against Russia were she to be elected Prime Minister then. Why do Sullivan and Blinken and Biden also keep repeating that Putin threatened to use nukes in Ukraine? Why the Putin threatened nukes narrative, Alistair, and why the Zelensky dirty bomb meme?
This is a very, very important point that you're making. And they do keep saying that, even though it is absolutely categoric that Russia does not use them unless there is an absolutely existential threat to the future of Russia as a state or as a people. But why are they saying this? Because there is a trend, and it's one that is worrying the Russians extremely. I think Foreign Minister Lavrov has just been talking about it on 60 Minutes on the Russian television program, and saying there is a trend in America which is trying to minimize the risk from using tactical nuclear weapons. There is an argument going on where they say that use of tactical nuclear weapons in a conflict like Ukraine may not or will not result in a nuclear war. And the Russians disagree profoundly with this view because they know they're right on the doorstep. And they know that the time it takes for missiles or nuclear weapons to be launched and arrive in Russia or at a target that they may not know which the target is minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. There's no time to make, careful decisions about if this is just a tactical move. But the Russian response to this is always going to be very clear. The Russians will have to go to full mobilization of their nuclear system if they have ballistic missiles launched against it, because they won't know that they're tactical until they've exploded. But if they weren't, how can they take that risk? So it is a very dangerous sort of doctrine that is being promoted by particularly by neocons, both in State Department and outside of State Department, that that this is all exaggerated and there's not that much worry about it. But just to be absolutely plain and to put it clearly, it's not Russia who has any intention of using tactical nuclear weapons. It is a current within the US that is advocating and saying they can be used without starting some major nuclear war.
Right. Alistair, does embracing energy rationing effectively allow the US the opportunity to fully assimilate Europe into the US economy? On the other hand, some are calling for a joint partnership and leadership between Europe and the US of A. Do you see the EU as a union today capable of dealing with the United States on an equal footing in a leadership partnership?
No, not at all. And I think this is why in Russia they're not interested in talking to Europe at all, and they disdain the Europeans. I mean, they don't answer their telephone calls usually because they see them as having no power whatsoever. And indeed, I mean, this is precisely what happened at the outset of this period. European Union abdicated its power, its political power to NATO, and its economic power to the United States when it started placing these sanctions on Russia, which deprive it of energy. And the point here, and you have to really, understand, the whole of the European Union industrial success and economic success was founded on cheap Russian gas.
Sure.
The LNG from America cost 7.5 to 8 times more. It just completely destroyed.
The liquefied natural gas, you mean, coming from the US?
The liquefied, exactly, costs between 7 and 8 times more. And it will just destroy the profitability, the competitiveness. And so where does that take you? Europe will have to become more protective. It'll put up tariffs, it'll try and subsidize companies, but it won't be able to, and it will solidify the gap between Europe and between Eurasia. As Eurasia sort of evolves, Europe will have no choice because of what's been done to it in robbing it of, and I have to say, actually, most Europeans just went into this with their eyes open and embraced it happily. the French, Minister of Economics said, we're going to collapse the Russian economy. It'll happen
Right.
very quickly.
Let's go further east now, Alistair. NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg considers China a security challenge to the alliance, and they need to face it today and in the future. The UK also Prime Minister Liz Truss voices similar stances. China focuses on preparing for war, where President Xi, on the same day that Putin declared a partial military mobilization, told top officers to focus their attention on gearing up for potential military action. Your prognosis, Alistair, how do you paint the political landscape and theatre today? Do you think Russia, China, Iran and its allies will win the war and this confrontation with the West and the US of A?
Yes, I just, as a preamble to what you've just said, we've just seen in this last night, America putting on major sanctions on Chinese acquisition of technology, particularly targeted at chips and microchips. I mean, it is a major escalation against China, but we have it all over the place. And I wrote recently in a piece for Meadine, in fact, an article in saying it's increasingly like what we saw in the lead up to the First World War, where Austria-Hungary was a major empire and it was failing, it was coming apart, and power was hemorrhaging away this way, hemorrhaging that way, hemorrhaging to sort of Saudi Arabia to make as well as to China. And it just couldn't afford. So it's trying to be tough to everyone. But after a while, you don't get people who give you deference. You get people who show you defiance. And that's what we've just seen from Saudi Arabia towards the United States, its closest ally. And we see it from other states like India, who does not vote in the UN Security Council for action against Russia, condemn the Ukraine project in the UN Security Council, nor did China. So, I mean, we're seeing this profound change. It is
today, Alistair, did the spatial geography of the world change?
Yes, did. It did change, and it has changed in this way, in that states are now saying that the interests, that the interests of the West are your interests, but don't expect them to be our interests too. They can be your interests. Whose side are we on? We're on our own side. We're not on America's side. We reject this binary. And yes, we know now that we don't have to be afraid. We can protect ourselves. We can reduce our vulnerability to a sort of angry hegemon sanctioning us or using financial war against us. We've learned that Russia, from the Russian example, that this is possible. And this is where it is. It's not to attack America. It's not to attack the West. It is that they are saying no longer this binary, are you with us on Ukraine? If not, you're against us. They're saying
the good and the evil.
Yeah, that's your problem. These European problems of yours are not our problems. Thank you very much. You deal with them. We have our own interests.
Right, Alistair Crook, founder and director of Conflicts Forum, thank you very much for your piercing geostrategic reading, analysis and prognosis. Always a pleasure to have you, Alistair.
Always a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
ودائما الشكر لكم مشاهدينا الكرام على طيب المتابعة. للتفاعل أكثر تابعونا على صفحات السوشيال ميديا، وحتى نلتقي من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.